بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته and welcome to this new episode of the GDM show, the Global Dawah Movement Show. We have a very interesting episode today. We have with us brother Wajid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How are you, bro?
I'm good, thanks. By yourself, you right?
Excellent.
Perfect.
Now, I want to ask you a few questions, bro. You are a student studying philosophy and psychology?
Yep, that's right, yeah.
At Manchester Metropolitan University?
Yep.
And you're 18, 19 years old?
21.
You're 21, okay. Baby face. MashaAllah. So you're 21 years old,
yeah.
And you weren't always a Muslim.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Just about a year and a half ago, you were an atheist. So
Yep.
let me ask you a question. Why did you embrace atheism?
I think generally the biggest issue or the biggest kind of aspect that made me turn to atheism was probably say culture, first and foremost culture. I mean, nowadays it's so difficult to get the kind of purest version of Islam. It's basically Islam with a bunch of culture. So it's very difficult to kind of, understand it from an intellectual and emotional and also a spiritual point of view. Instead, it's just a cultural kind of point of view. So when I saw these kind of, these kind of events and activities happening around me and people, the way people were handling themselves, how people were talking about Islam, about its intellectual foundation and so on, I found it very difficult to kind of believe. I felt like, there's something not right here. There's something, and slowly, eventually, when more and more culture came in, and eventually I felt like, no, it's not the right.
So you're basically saying there was a mix of like cultural aspects of where Muslims come from, mixing with what Islam was. So if someone was talking about the intellectual kind of foundations, because the cultural aspect was so overpowering, you just decided to be like, this is not for me.
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's kind of weird though, because just before I turned as an atheist or agnostic, I used to look into the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ a lot. I used to, read a lot of stuff about him and so on. And I loved his character. His character was just beautiful and stuff. And even the Quran, I used to love listening to the Quran. But when I saw that the kind of how Muslims handle themselves and how Muslims are nowadays, it was very difficult to kind of, bring the two together. It was
so the
very
kind
hard.
Of hypocrisy, if you like.
Yeah, but I don't want to be like, I don't want to say everyone's like that, of course.
No, of course not. But it's your experience.
Yeah, my experience was that, yeah. And also, you know more than a lot of people about this, but the rise of atheism as well, the rise of science and so on. This kind of agenda that everything has to be objective, and not objective, but everything has to be
explained scientifically.
Scientifically, reduced to physical, physical things and so on. So, when I saw that, it's really now, especially nowadays, it's very powerful. It's very very attractive, especially to the modern youth and so on. Yeah.
So basically, your atheism was based upon culture, people's misapplication of Islam, the kind of social, individual hypocrisy that they had. They're supposed to believe and do something, but they don't. Yeah. And also because of the rise of scientific rationalism and stuff. Yeah. So then you became Muslim.
Yeah.
How?
It was a weird experience actually, because once I moved into uni, I still had the same mindset. Still kind of, to be honest, I'd say ignorant. I was very ignorant at the time. Maybe slightly arrogant as well, because as you know, when you kind of get into that mindset, and of course not all atheists are like that, not all, but when you do get into that mindset, sometimes what can happen is you can see yourself as like, I know a little about science now, so I know everything. I'm very intelligent now, so on. And
well, that happens to all people, even in the Islamic tradition, when people know a little bit about Islam, they think they become scholars now.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a human trait.
Yeah, it's a big internal kind of characteristics that we humans have. But once I kind of once I kind of put that aside, and I thought, let's just be open-minded for once, because I met a few people and they started helping me, started talking to me. And one sister, especially, she helped me a lot. She'd always kind of, be constant, not aggressive in terms of akhlaq, the akhlaq was there, always talking to me, telling me,
akhlaq meaning the manners, the compassion,
the adab, it was
etiquettes.
Etiquette was completely there, and she'd always, help push me, be like, this is what Islam says, this is what it says, and I'd always, at times I say rude things, and I'd kind of,
and she would tolerate it.
Yeah,
she had forbearance,
and that's the most beautiful thing about Islam, and what it kind of, what it's all about is tolerance and humility.
Because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he had forbearance, hilm. Forbearance is basically being patient with negativity and hatred and even aggression.
Yeah, of course.
And when people were aggressive to him, he tolerated it with the most compassionate way.
Yeah, and that's the most beautiful thing. So once I saw that,
It got you thinking?
Yeah, I started thinking again. Of course, at that moment, that time, it was just an emotional reason. There's no kind of intellectual foundation behind it or anything. So once I kind of started thinking a little bit, started thinking more, and I thought, you know what, I gave myself 2 weeks. I said to myself, 2 weeks, I'm going to study Islam as much as I can, and I see, we'll see what happens. We'll see if I go back to it, if I don't. And instead, actually, I couldn't hold myself, so I ended up I think, I'll try anyway. So I just,
that's your fitrah, that's your innate nature coming out.
That's it, yeah. So I felt kind of good about it. I said my shahada and everything, and then, but even then, I wasn't 100%. I wasn't like, I was still like, 70, 60, 70%.
Sure.
Even though I said my shahada, I was still like, I still had a lot of questions and so on. But eventually, what happened is, in the last summer holidays, I started reading a lot into the philosophy of science and philosophy of religion and so on, and I watched a lot of lectures and eventually I kind of realized
let me just hold this point, because in the GDM shows we've been highlighting the issues of the philosophy of science a lot, because we've realized that scientific rationalism is a false worldview, if you like, that everything can be explained scientifically and it leads to certainty and this is the only way. But if you have an academic approach to discussion, which is not the popular culture but the mainstream academia, you see that if you study the philosophy of science, science is great, it's a beautiful tool, but it doesn't lead to certainty. Even if it works, it may not be true. And we've given all these examples in previous shows. So what's really interesting is, by studying the philosophy of science, it basically crumbled the kind of false view of scientific rationalism. This is the only way.
Science,
science can pay your bills, get you married, solve your existential problems.
But as you just said, I mean, and a big example of that would be prove the existence of God to me, as in objectively. I mean, you can't like, I can't go and like specifically do that. That's a scientific. It goes against the scientific method. It doesn't go against the scientific method, but
it descopes the scientific.
Yeah, exactly.
Method,
you can't prove God.
Yes, science is based on observation.
Yeah, of course.
And God, by definition, is unobserved.
It's a
so how can science that relies on direct observation, indirect observation, try and disprove something that cannot be observed?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's outside. It's descoped. You can't deal with metaphysics, basically.
Exactly. It's a metaphysical issue.
So give us some of the things you learned about the philosophy of science that allowed you to deal with this issue.
It was actually one of the main things, I think, was breaking the scientific method down. As in, I think the common belief is that only induction and reduction, that's the only thing that works. And apart from that, deduction and testimony is completely irrelevant, and it's a thing of the past and a thing of philosophy and so on. And so once I kind of looked into that a bit more, I thought, what, actually, like, there's so many more methods apart from the induction.
And sources of knowledge.
And sources of knowledge that you can potentially use to come to the truth
and we actually do use it for mathematics, for history, for psychology. We use it for philosophy, for metaphysics, for so many things, for ethics.
Even in science times, inferences and so on. Certain different kind of things that you have to use.
Brilliant. So even for science, we basically have to rely on testimony, because you can't know all the scientific information yourself. You have to rely on other people's workings. So that's the testimonial aspect of science.
Of course,
That's brilliant. So what advice would you give to someone who's probably left Islam? He was a Muslim, he left Islam and thinking of coming back. What kind of advice would you give them?
I think the best advice, I would personally give from my own experience would be that be open-minded. I think it's very difficult. I mean, it's kind of funny as well, because once you kind of leave Islam, sometimes when you leave theism, you kind of think that you've reached a level where you're very open-minded and so on, but it's not always the case. I mean, I'm an example of that. I became very close-minded, but I thought, because I believe in science and I believe in I believe in Dawkins and so on, that I know everything. But of course, I'm just a human being at the end of the day, and I think just open your mind.
Humility.
Yeah, humility. Wallahi, that's humility, and just be honest. Talk to people, and
because being arrogant is a barrier to divine guidance and mercy, and humility is actually opens the door to divine guidance and mercy. On a final point, how did worship help you? Because we know that Islam is not just intellectual gymnastics, being convinced is not only in your mind, but it's in your heart. So how did ibadah, how did worship, dhikr, prayer help you in all of this stuff? Because from my limited experience, people who leave Islam are those who never had a connection with Allah in the first place, generally speaking. So what would be your views on this?
When I did leave, I didn't, I kind of stopped believing in Allah. I felt like it was, I don't want to use the word, but it was useless, and I didn't have to kind of do it and so on. But even though when I was an atheist or agnostic, I still kind of had a connection. It's really hard to explain. I still had some kind of connection. When I saw people pray or the Quran being recited, it felt really nice. But I couldn't explain that. As an atheist, I couldn't explain that. I was like, what? Why am I still feeling that? I'm an atheist now. I got there's nothing for me in Islam, but I still kind of have that that feeling, that kind of And every time I heard a story of the Prophet ﷺ, I still felt really connected, and I was just like, why is this happening? But in terms of worship, very important, very, very, very important. I think I think one of the things that leads people away is a lack of worship. And, that's one of the things I did. I stopped kind of worshiping a little bit, and then eventually it became, further and further, and, I ended up leaving. So, honestly, worship is like, dhikr, salah, make sure, 5 times a day. It's so, so important, honestly.
That's brilliant. So basically what this is telling us is that, moving away from worship actually in a way, creates doubts that didn't exist in the first
Yeah, of
place.
course, yeah.
And then it could lead you away.
Yeah.
And then the more connection you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring you closer, and those doubts will be erased. And I've seen this in my life too as well, bro. In the 13, 14 years I've become Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, when I lacked a connection with Allah, then the doubts that I could answer better than most people at that time,
yeah.
I considered as doubts. I remember I was speaking to someone, giving them advice why they should become a Muslim.
Yeah.
And I gave them a great answer, for example,
Yeah, yeah.
but inside me I was like, I know it's a great answer, but I still doubt it. I don't know
still
why.
doubt it, yeah.
And that was because I realized it wasn't an intellectual issue, it was an issue of my heart. Where was my heart inclined
It's an
towards?
emotional,
Was it the
spiritual
ego?
issue, yeah.
You know, was I too arrogant? You know, was I connected with Allah? Was I doing my dhikr, my remembrance in the morning and the evening? This is brilliant, bro. Wallahi, I mean, this is an amazing. We'll get you back for more shows, inshallah. Yeah.
Inshallah, man. That'd be
Good.
good.
May Allah
That'd be
bless you,
great.
bro.
Thanks,
Assalamu
man.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Jazakallah khair.
barakatuh.
Thank you.
Keep in touch.